So what we're looking at behind me in my now sort of signature window display of records is something I thought we might not ever see, um, even though there was a sequel to it about, I don't know, 14 years ago now, 15 years ago, and it's Chrome Dreams by Neil Young. Legendary unreleased record, one that got shelved apparently. A little unclear whether it was a record company's decision or his. Get the feeling it was more his. He just didn't think it was right for the time. Pulled back on it. Talked about it. It would show up in interviews. I think that it was spoken of before it came out as a coming soon kind of record. You mentioned Chrome Dreams when he had the '76 tour with Crazy Horse, or shortly after. And it definitely gained more momentum and more popularity once the '90s rolled around and a bootleg of it, of a supposedly from an acetate, started floating around. It had a different cover. It was like Neil, kind of wearing a flannel shirt, sitting on I think on the hood of a car or something. But so it doesn't look anything like this. And it's a little unclear where this artwork came from too. It's done by Ronnie Wood, but it says Christmas of '76 on it, which would be the right timeline. But Neil's also talked about some sketch that David Briggs did for the cover that couldn't be found. A little unclear to me if maybe he means Ronnie Wood and he got it confused with David Briggs, because what's the likelihood they'd both do a sketch for this record around Christmas of '76, around that timeline? But anyway, this thing is finally out. It's out on vinyl, it's out on CD. It came out a few weeks ago. A lot of people were a little pissed off about it because this vinyl's like 45, $50, which is kind of crazy, you know. I mean, it is two slabs of vinyl, two discs, but it's not really, I don't know, most people probably wouldn't call it a double record, although obviously it's more cost prohibitive to put it on two records, but totally makes up for it in fidelity. I mean, it sounds absolutely amazing. But I get why people were upset about that. I kind of was too. I was like, do I really want this? That was part of it initially. Like, okay, I have all these songs, or most of them. I've heard them all, most of them. And I knew, in this digital world, you could, even before it came out, pretty much put together a playlist that would be this. And certainly once it came out, you could do that. But did I need this? Did I want this on vinyl, in this format, and be willing to pay that price tag? And ultimately, I kind of pre-ordered it and forgot about it, and I was mighty happy when I got it, because I do think it's worth it. I think it is a really strong record to have, and it plays beautifully. The versions of these songs, even though some of them are new, some of them are like a hurricane. I don't think has changed much, but they've never sounded better. Like a Hurricane has never sounded better. So many of these songs where they showed up on other records later on, you see them in kind of their infancy here, but in a lot of cases, I think the versions we have here are better, or they just work. A lot of people have been kind of questioning the timing of this and wondering why it couldn't have been released in a different order. I mean, Neil is actively, or has actively, put out unreleased records. Ones we've known about, like Homegrown. Ones we didn't really know about until pretty close to when it came out, like Toast. And in a record like Hitchhiker, which we also didn't know of and didn't know was an unreleased record. And that's the record, Hitchhiker, that kind of ruins this for some people, because Hitchhiker was a record that we got to hear a lot of these songs on in takes that we weren't familiar with. The legend goes that he did a session late at night of all new songs, just him and David Briggs, let the tape roll, captured them all on acoustic, and that was Hitchhiker. And some of the songs recorded that night are songs on here, like the lead song on here, Pocahontas, like Captain Kennedy, and Powderfinger. And I would argue that they sound much better in this environment. I've never thought that Hitchhiker was one of his best records. It's more like a curiosity. On this collection, I think those songs really work. A song like Captain Kennedy, I never really cared for Hawks and Doves. I rated it pretty low in my countdown of Neil Young records. and I never really paid attention to it on that record. It stands out on this one. Maybe it's the sequencing, maybe it's a collection of songs that's around. I just read a Jeff Tweedy interview, and he talks about how some songs make the album, make the cut on Wilco Records, and some don't, and a lot of it has to do with the songs around them. Are they bouncing off the collective energy? Are they strengthening the songs around them and being strengthened by the songs around them, or are they something else? And do they need to wait for the proper home? This album, I think, really does work really well from start to finish. It has an interesting flow, or in some ways you would say lack of. It definitely does feel like a quilt, like a patchwork from different sessions, which it was. But it's such a strong collection. You kind of have to suspend disbelief a little bit. Homegrown was supposed to come out in '75, got pulled. Now some of those songs on Homegrown are on here, like the title song and Star of Bethlehem. But if you imagine a world, which would have been true in 1977, early 1977, where Homegrown never came out, and where Hitchhiker, nobody had heard of it, much like we hadn't for years, and this record lands, this record would be such an amazing Neil Young record. It is an amazing Neil Young record. The problem is you just have to kind of reshape your mindset around it. I mean, it's absolutely stellar material. Pocahontas, Powderfinger, Star of Bethlehem, Look Out for My Love, Like a Hurricane. It's just a powerhouse of a record. It's mostly kind of mellow, but then it has total rock moments like a Hurricane, Homegrown. It has songs that wouldn't show up till Freedom, like Too Far Gone, and I think a really, really better version of it. It's just, you can just feel kind of his motion in it. It's like this just down home kind of country song. It doesn't sound quite as polished as the other version, although the other version's from a vantage point of a much older person. I think they're both valid, but it's just really nice hearing those songs, that song on this record. The other one that I've always loved from the time I heard Neil Young's Unplugged record is String Man. That's really nice to have a home on here. And another one is Hold Back the Hold Back the Tears, which I'm not that big of a fan of American Stars and Bars. I've learned to like it. I like the second side. A lot of it, most of it, all of it's represented here. But that first side, the only song that's represented here is Hold Back the Years, or Hold Back the Tears. I keep saying Hold Back the Years. It's Hold Back the Tears. And for those of you not familiar, American Stars and Bars was the record that was released eventually instead of this one. But this is a vastly superior record to American Stars and Bars, I believe. You just have to kind of, like I said, suspend disbelief and then sort of realize that other albums later on wouldn't have come out the way they would had this been released. But Neil has such a wealth of material. Who knows? Would Powderfinger have shown up just on live Rust and we'd have that version, and maybe we don't need it on Rust Never Sleeps and we would have gotten a version of Shots instead? Who knows? It's interesting to speculate. It's interesting to look at the tracks that were recorded around that time, go to his archive site, see what could have been. But this album, as it is, I think is a absolutely stellar record. And I'm trying to see if there's any other. Homegrown, that song, the title song off of Homegrown, but this is a different version. This is the one off American Stars and Bars. I never liked it on American Stars and Bars. I like it on here. So little things like that, but it plays really nicely. The only complaint I probably have about it is there's some very almost obnoxious leaps in volume, between the slower songs and the rock songs, where you've kind of like, when Like a Hurricane comes on, you got to like pretty much get up from the room and turn it down if you've got it at a perfect late night volume. You don't want to disturb anybody. I can just imagine what it would have been like in 1977. This is your follow-up to Zuma, this album with great killer versions of all these songs, and just a patchwork, much like Decade, but all new material. It would have been really, really interesting. So that's my take on Chrome Dreams. I think it's a must-have. I often wonder too, like, if you know somebody who's getting into Neil Young and all they have is Harvest and After the Gold Rush, and maybe they've heard songs here or there, this might be the next record. This might be the one to give them, to let them hear these songs this way for the first time, if that's possible. Because I would bet that a lot of those people that hear this for the first time this way wouldn't have such a precious take on the whole situation. Would probably learn to love this record and might actually find the ones that came after it a little inferior. So anyway, that's my take on Chrome Dreams. So while we're on the topic of Neil Young, I thought I would share my thoughts on these 4 records you can see behind me. Freedom, Ragged Glory, Weld, which is a live double disc, with double disc initially on CD, live recording from the Ragged Glory tour, and Arc, which was kind of a sonic collage put together from fragments of feedback from the Weld tour at the suggestion of Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. And I think one of them, either Weld or Arc in the mixing stage, damaged Neil's hearing. I remember him talking about it. I saw that come up in some interview. And yeah, all 4 of these records came out in a box set. I'm usually not one for these original release series, volume, whatever from Neil. I have the records already. There's no need for me to go out and buy box sets of things. However, I didn't have any of these 4 records. I waited till the price dropped. I actually got a really good deal on this, like I think $135 for all of it. And I'm glad I did. I'm really glad I picked these up. Freedom has never sounded better. Freedom sounds in a lot of ways kind of like Chrome Dreams. It's sort of all over the place. I think Chrome Dreams is a better record, but Freedom is really underrated. And that, of all these records, is probably the one that will get the most play. I really think it's an underrated record. I think it got overshadowed a little bit by what came right after it, Ragged Glory and the whole tour and Weld and everything else. Ragged Glory sounds really good on this recording, this record. There's a whole side of unreleased songs that were outtakes from it, like Don't Spook the Horse and Interstate. And I really wish they'd been included. I really wish they'd done a better job of making the record a little less one-dimensional. Of all his records, I think it is the most one-dimensional record of his. It's just all rock, which is great if you're in the mood for it. But I would have loved to have an Interstate on there and just kind of broken it up a little bit. There's songs in there that I think could have been introduced, and maybe some songs from Ragged Glory taken off to make a more interesting record. But some people absolutely love it, and I find that I love that material on Weld. Now, Weld was something that came out when I was in college. Like I said, one of the early records I got from Neil, and I didn't like the Ragged Glory material on it, and I have not listened to Weld much at all in 30 years. It wasn't, live records were not something I did on my countdown of Neil records. So when I put it on, I expected not to like it. And I almost didn't buy this set because I didn't really care about having Weld or Arc in some ways. I thought maybe I'd wait till Freedom and Ragged Glory came out on their own. But boy, hearing a live album that you haven't heard in years after you became a huge fan of an artist is a really interesting thing, because it's a different versions of the songs, obviously, and it has a real different vibe to it than something like Live Rust or the one that came out from the 96 tour, which is escaping me right now. I'll probably put an image of it above my face so you can see it. Year of the Horse. This, and seeing him live several times. I just didn't really remember what a just furious, guitar record, the energy on it, the way he sings the songs. It's really quite refreshing, and I really found myself enjoying it a lot. So I'm really glad I got the whole set to have that. And I even listened to Arc, and I have to say I kind of enjoyed it. There were more bits of familiar songs in there than I thought it would be. And somebody just says it's just all noise. I think of Metal Machine music or something. And this was a little bit more ambient, or I had it on when I was working and it worked just fine. It didn't distract me. So maybe it's something I'll play once in a while. But I do know that I will go back to Freedom a lot. And I think Weld is actually going to get quite a few spins on my turntable. It already has. Ragged Glory, I think I just have to be in the mood for it. I'm definitely going to play that new side, though. It's really interesting, and it's just makes the record so much more rich. Like I said, I kind of wish that that what Ragged Glory hadn't been so one dimensional. That maybe some of these extra songs could have made it a more dynamic record. But these are all great. Neil Young records is definitely a period. We're talking, 89 to 91. We're talking like a 2-3 year period with all this stuff came out. But really glad to have them. Really hope that Neil moves forward now into the 90s. I'm looking forward to Sleeps with Angels, probably more than any record of his, but all the 90s records, including Mirrorball and Broken Arrow and maybe even the Live 96 record. Haven't heard that one in a long time either. May find that I really like hearing that again as well. He's an artist who always keeps you guessing, and there's so much to discover there. And as I've noticed, an awful lot to rediscover. So I think I've heard that these records are getting released individually, maybe around the first of the year, but it's definitely worth picking up. There are deals out there on this set. I found one, and I don't think that that was an isolated event. So anyway, that's what I've got for this September Neil Young update. Supposedly he has a new record coming out in October, I think, or that was December. I can't remember, but he said a new record. Some people think that might be recordings from his latest tour, the Coastal Tour, but you never know. And Otakon Budokan just came out, a live record. Always putting out the product, but these are excellent, of course, and definitely give Chrome Dreams a shot. Chrome Dreams 2, it's still weird to me they did that first, but that's Neil.